Hi, this is Meg Lightheart from megalightheart.com. I wanted to do something a bit different this week. I've been reading this book for quite a while, The Age of Overwhelm by Laura Van Dernoot Lipsky, who is a specialist in working with people with secondary trauma. So those are people who work with people who are experiencing trauma, and she wrote this fab book called Trauma Stewardship, which was specifically for people who experience secondary trauma, so are in like front lines of things. And then she's written a more general book about overwhelm, and I realised that not everyone has the energy or time or capacity to read a book, and I found some of the stuff really useful. And she has a set of recommendations about if the way overwhelm manifests is distraction, is disconnection, is being attached and entrenched, and is being depleted. And I figured that we'd do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on each one of those, because her recommendations are really simple. But I want to spend this video just introducing how she talks about overwhelm, and setting the grounds for that. And really it's about creating the conditions for us to be able to deal with the stuff that's going on for the long haul. She talks about the types of overwhelm, so how overwhelm manifests personally, how it manifests in terms of our relationships and our family, how it manifests in terms of community and society, and that an individual can be overwhelmed. You can be overwhelmed in a relationship, your family can be overwhelmed, your community can be overwhelmed, society as a whole can be overwhelmed, and I think we're seeing more and more of that going on. And also the factors of what lessens our ability to deal with overwhelm. And she really goes into epigenetics, so that trauma that's happened generations back that still gets expressed in our bodies now, intergenerational trauma and oppression, systematic oppression, and also the internalized oppression for when marginalized people begin to believe the society's take on marginalised people, things connected with health, which also includes things like sleep and food and exercise and screen time and stuff. And so those already begin to mean that marginalised people are experiencing reduced capacity to deal with overwhelm. And then she also talks about how overwhelm comes from our commitment to our family and our community, how it comes from our commitment to school if you're still studying, how our commitment to work means that we're overwhelmed, particularly if you're in a culture of overwork or you're doing 2 or 3 people's job, has been building up as the case over the past few decades. And then something that I found really reassuring was she also talked about like worldly things, like economic factors mean that we're overwhelmed. Facing world events means that we're overwhelmed. Climate crisis means that we're overwhelmed. And all of those things together mean that it was really affirming, like not gaslighting, to have someone say you're right to be overwhelmed and there is a way through. And the bit at the end of that chapter where she's talking about all those causes of overwhelm is she also says it's important for us to recognise that almost none of those things that we just mentioned are our personal responsibility to solve, that there's a good question to ask to go, what's within my personal control, what's in our collective control, and being able to go, this is not under my personal control but we can affect it collectively, is an important distinction to make, particularly for someone like me who My family's always telling me, my people are always telling me about that I take responsibility for everything emotionally, and being able to go, hold on, what am I able to, what's my responsibility, and what's my responsibility to be part of the collective of changing is important. So the book goes on to talk about creating the conditions for us to deal with overwhelm better. And so those go into three main things of metabolizing our exposure. And metabolizing is both the breaking down and the building up. So when we're talking in terms of biology, and breaking things down, catabolism is also about breaking down the things that we've internalized or the things that we're carrying, and then the anabolism, the building up of strength and capacity for us to be able to deal with things in a more healthy way. She also talks about relieving saturation, and saturation being literally our nervous system at its capacity. And we don't deal with saturation very well. We go to full-on primal instincts in terms of fight and flight and freeze. And what can we do to be as saturated as little of the time as possible? She's super realistic about not turning into like super positive spiritual white lady, let's just be positive. She's really aware of, because she's been working for decades with people at the front lines of things, that it's not about going into denial. It's about how do we have strategies to stay healthy, because it's only when we're healthy that we can stay in the fight. And then also the third thing she talks about, so it's metabolizing exposure, relieving saturation, and then also acknowledging potential barriers, which might be internal barriers in terms of identifying ourselves as an overwhelmed person, like finding identity in that. It also may be the people around you, encouraging a culture of overwhelm, and also like society and media encouraging that overwhelm as well. So how do we can only find our way through if we notice those barriers and then do some processing of them. So the next 4 videos of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is she talks about how to move from being distracted to being intentional. And all of her recommendations are like, nothing was super ground shifting for me, but it was really, really good reminders of stuff to go, oh yeah, there were lots of stuff that is in my control, not about what's happening in the world, but about how I deal with it and process it. Moving from being disconnected to being more present. Moving from being attached, and by that she means entrenched in our positions, to going to being more curious, so attached to curious, and going from depleted to building up more long-term stamina. So those are going to be the videos Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week. I do recommend that if you have the space to get a copy, but also because I'm just going to be picking out the stuff that I think is relevant, and it's going to be my take. But this week I'm pretty much using what she's written about, rather than it just coming from my perspective. So I hope that's useful. Going to be a useful project for us this week. If you want some support, one-on-one support in putting together your own strategies, then go to megalightheart.com and have a look at coaching options. If you're not looking for a coach but you've got a steady income and you'd like to remove the economic stressor of one freelancer, then please go to patreon.com/megalightheart and become a monthly patron and support me producing this type of content. And of course, if you click like, if you leave a comment or a question, if you share these videos with other people, or if you're on YouTube you subscribe, that helps the algorithms and helps more people get exposed to the content that I'm producing. So I'll see you Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week. I'm Meg Lightheart from megalightheart.com, and I'll I'll see you tomorrow with the first things around moving from distraction to being intentional.